everyone, my name's Kelvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. Today I'm going to show you how to paint another Zen style naturalist bird scene like this. And I've been working on refining this technique over the last week, and this process here is even easier and the results are even better than in the last bird tutorial. So it's absolutely okay if you are a beginner because this tutorial is made for you. Now, usually I get right into the tutorial, but just this time, just this once, I want to take a few seconds to explain a new thing on the Etsy store called the iPad Mockup Creator. It's a tool for showing off your artwork, so you can use this thing to arrange like a scene in Procreate using various shadows and background options that come with it. And then you can drop in your artwork and basically create this perfect clean little image that really showcases your artwork with a little more context because it includes the iPad. It's easy to use, it works with the Procreate you already have, and if you want to learn more, I'll put more information about this in the description below. And with that, back to the tutorial. So I've already got a watercolor paper texture loaded into Procreate, and this time I'm using the St. Petersburg texture. And for the brushes, I'll be doing all this with the regular watercolor kit and the Scratchy pen brushes. And I'll put links to everything, including the free Scratchy pen brushes and the free sketch I'm using in the description below. So I've already got the sketch placed in here, and I've set it as the very top layer. I've also set the transparency mode to multiply and then lowered the opacity just around to the point where I can barely see it, but it's not too distracting. And after that, I'm going to select a blank layer underneath the paper texture and start painting here just like you normally would. Now I'm going to start with the abstract round brush, and this is part of the regular watercolor kit. And I'm going to set the abstract round brush to around 30% in size. And I'm going to start by painting the body of the bird, and I'm going to try to do it in 2 strokes just from the nose to the tail. And it turned out that there was a little bit of a gap there, so I'm just going to loosely kind of cover that up. There's a couple of weird overlapping strokes, but it's not a big deal because I can fix that later on with the water blender. The main problem here is that I've gone way beyond the edge of the sketch. What I'm going to do is grab the eraser brush, and I'm going to set that to the fine liner pen, which is also part of the regular watercolor kit. And I'm just going to fix that and kind of erase it to match the sketch a little bit better. Next, I'm going to change the color to a slightly lighter version of that khaki color. And I'm going to use the same abstract round brush, same size, and I'm just going to fill out this wing and the back wing. And I'm going to try to do it in as few strokes as possible. So that looks pretty good, and I did leave some kind of white gaps here, and that was on purpose because I do think it suits this style. Next, I can move on and do the tail. And I'm going to do the same thing, same brush, same size, and I'm going to do this in 3 strokes. Next, I'm going to use the water blender to kind of soften up some of these overlapping brush strokes. So I'm going to grab the water blender here at the bottom of the brush list, maybe around 10 or 15%. I'm just going to go in there and just break these up enough. I know they're going to create dark spots, but that's okay. I just want to soften them up. Now in the areas where there's kind of some feathers going on, I'm going to try to blend that along the direction of the feathers. There we go. A little bit smoother, but not too smooth. Next, I'm going to add some black feather details on the head and the tips of the wings. And I'm going to do that with the selection tool set to freehand. And I'll first make a selection on the head, just like this. Reconnect it. I'll feather it out just a little bit, maybe around 10%. Then I'll go to my adjustments, hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer. Then I can just lower the brightness. And I'm going to lower it basically all the way until it becomes pure black. And next I'm going to do the same thing on both of these wingtips. Then I can add, and that will let me draw another selection. So I'll do the other wing. Then I'll feather those out about the same amount, maybe a little bit less. Hue, saturation, and brightness for the layer. And then I'll darken it to black again. And I'm going to go back in there with the same water blender I used before, same size. And I'm going to try to stretch out the fade on the wing. And I'm going to again go with the direction of the feathers. And what I'm trying to do here is kind of accentuate the long feathers that you see on the bird's wings. And I'm not doing the same thing on the head because these feathers are much, much smaller and finer. And next I can do a little bit of shading, and I'm going to use the selection tool again, set to freehand. And I'm basically going to make a selection along the back here, and this will be a highlight. So I'll feather that out quite a bit. Hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll brighten that up. I'll do a similar thing on the tail. And then I'm going to darken the belly of the bird here a little bit. So same thing, freehand selection tool like this. Feather it out. But this time, I'm going to darken it. Now I've done this bird a few times as practice, and I found that it looks nice when I darken the tail a little bit. So I'm going to do that too. And I think the reason it looks better is because the head of the bird is black, so it does look a little bit out of balance if the tail of the bird is very light. Now, often with digital painting, your colors are too consistent, so I'm going to mix it up a little bit. So I'm going to grab the selection tool again, set to freehand, and I'll make a random selection just like this. I'll feather it out quite a bit, and that selection only covers random portions of the bird. So when I go to my adjustments for the hue, saturation, and brightness, and I shift the hue a little bit, you can see it just sort of drops in this kind of secondary, slight kind of magenta tone, and I just like that kind of natural variation. It's more convincing. Next, I'm going to move on and do all the other details for this bird, and I'm going to do those with the Scratchy Pens brush kit, but I'm going to make sure I do it on another layer, so I'll make a new layer above the body of the bird, and I'm going to go to the Scratchy Pens, and I'm going to use only the Scratchy liner brush for the rest of this bird. So I'll start with the head here, and I know you can't see it on the camera, but I can see a very light oval shape here. This is from the sketch. So I'm going to grab pure white, and then use this Scratchy brush here at a pretty small size, and just carefully fill out the eye in white first. And after that, I'm going to select almost pure black. I'm not going to go all the way, just about this area, and I'll fill in the pupil, I guess. Next, I'm going to use the same brush, same black color to fill in the beak. And I've intentionally left a little bit of white showing through because it makes the beak look sort of shiny. Next, I'm going to do some light line details on the body of the bird, especially the wings and the tail. So I'll just randomly do a couple of black lines like this. And the feet are pretty easy. For this foot, I'll just do a little scribble here, and then I'm going to rough out the rest of it. And I'll do the other one kind of the same way. And you know, the feet, they're not the focal point, so I'm not going to get carried away trying to make them perfect because nobody will really notice these very much. And with that, the bird is done. And you can kind of switch off the sketch and get an idea. If you see some area that's lacking contrast, you could add more black lines, but really try not to get carried away with it. One thing I noticed with this bird is there's kind of a bump on the head. So I'll just fix that real quick with the eraser brush. And once you're totally happy with the bird, you can just merge the two layers we used. Just pinch them together like that on one layer, and I'll make a new layer above it, and this is where I'm going to do the background. So the background is pretty easy, but with this Zen style that we're doing, I really prefer using minimal colors. So we've already got black and this khaki color, so I've really only got one color left. So I've decided to do all the background elements as one color, basically like monochrome. So I'm going to select a kind of a light purpley blue color. And for the brush, I'm going to use the same Scratchy liner, but probably at a little bit of a larger size, maybe like 20%. And for the branches, I guess the trick here is I'm going to move in these kind of sudden jagged strokes. And I'll do the same to the other one. And it's okay that it's covering the bird because we're going to fix that later on. Next, I'm going to do the leaves and the berries, but I'm going to use the abstract round brush for that. And the leaves are really easy. I'm going to do them kind of stroke based, and what I mean is I'm going to start very, very lightly, then press harder to make the brush bigger, and then just press lighter and lighter, and then taper it off. And I'm going to do all the leaves this way. And after that, I'm going to move on and do the berries. And the berries are easy, but the trick is I'm going to use a very small brush size, and that's going to force me to press harder. so maybe around 9 or 10%. I'll start in the middle and press harder and harder and kind of circle my way out. And I'll do the same thing for the rest of them. Next, I'm going to go over the side of each one to add a little bit of a shadow. And I'll add the stems real quick. And then at a really small size for this brush, I'll add a little dot on the end of each berry. And it's totally up to you, but I think I want to blend some of these overlapping edges a little bit. So I'm going to grab the water blender and add a super tiny size. I'll just blend up some of these hard edges, but I'll try to leave quite a few behind. And now for the overlapping branch on the bird, I'm just going to grab the eraser and manually kind of cut that back. And I did sort of round the edges a little bit, because if you were painting this on paper, you couldn't obviously erase it. You'd have to carefully stop, pick up the brush, and then continue again. So rounding the edges makes it look a little more realistic. And now I can turn off the sketch. I don't need it anymore. I'm just going to go over it again with the same eraser brush, kind of a smaller size, and I'm going to do a little channel down the middle of each leaf. So I'll start very lightly and kind of pulse the brush a little bit and then fade it off. And that just adds a really simple kind of detail on the leaves. So at this point it could be done, but I do notice a slight issue with the background scene. So our bird has a lot of shading, it has highlights, shadows, and a little bit more detail. The background is supposed to be abstract, but it looks flat, and that's because it totally lacks any shading. So I think in this case it will look really nice if we add a couple of shadows and a couple of highlights, and that's really easy to do. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, I'll set it to freehand again, and I'll do the shadows. The shadows are the easiest part. I'm just going to select the whole bottom of the scene, then I'll feather out that selection quite a bit, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll just darken it. Now we need to be a little more selective for the highlights, because if we imagine kind of sunlight is coming in from this direction, it's going to hit these leaves because they're sort of on a different plane as the bird. So I'm going to grab the selection tool again, it's still set to freehand, and I'll make a selection just on the areas where I can kind of imagine sunlight is hitting. And all those selections are active, so I can feather them out at the same time, and I'll feather them out quite a bit, maybe around 30%. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness again, and I'll brighten them. And you can see when I brighten it, it's making these leaves sort of more purple. It's bringing out the purple in that original color. And the problem with that is sunlight is very white. Maybe sometimes in the day it's actually a very warm white. So it doesn't make sense that these are becoming such a cool color. So while I'm messing with the brightness here, I'll set that to where I want it. I'm also going to mess with the hue and sort of shift it and try to find a slightly warmer tone to drop in there. I think this kind of yellow color is really suitable. It also matches the bird, so we're not adding in any new colors. It is a little bit too saturated, so I'm going to lower the saturation so it still looks like a distant kind of abstract background element. There we go. If it's too saturated, it's going to catch your eye away from the bird a little bit too much. And there we go, this one is all done, and here's what it looks like when I print it out. So hopefully this technique is pretty easy to follow and it's pretty repeatable. If you want more inspiration for this style of illustration, the key word is Sumi ink. I think it's really a unique way of seeing the world, and it leaves plenty of room for you to kind of adjust it to your own style, and I have a lot of fun painting this way. And once again, if you're interested in the iPad Mockup Creator I mentioned earlier, please give it a look on the Etsy store and let me know what you think. As with everything in my shop, you can always just get a refund if it's not what you want, and processing refunds is really easy, so if you want a refund for it, I can send it in about a day. And that pretty much wraps it up. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.